Hi everyone, my name is Martha. I'm a relationship counselor and clinical sexologist. I'm based in Singapore and I've been in practice for 10 years. So I have a master's in counseling, doctorate in human sexuality, 2 other degrees, many other trainings. And what I do is I work with individuals and couples who have relationship and sexuality questions, issues, challenges. And I also run workshops. So I've been doing this for a long time. In today's video, I want to just make some comments about what's been happening in Singapore. There's this spat of voyeurism that is happening, especially in campuses, residences, namely the bathrooms. So it's not just the undergraduates who are doing this, but apparently a non-student and non-faculty member has also been caught trying to peep into the bathrooms of women. So it really started to take on more attention when a student, her name is Monica, and she actually complained that the school didn't address her concerns seriously. So they suspended the person who was peeping at her for 1 semester and banned him from having access to the on-campus housing, made him write an apology letter, and then that was it. And the police gave him a 12-month conditional warning. So 30,000 people actually petitioned and said this was not acceptable. Even the minister came forward and said that it was really grossly lacking. And even the student organizations actually wrote a letter about concern about the safety of the campus. So since that case with Monica, actually 4 other cases were reported. And in NTU, which is another university in Singapore, a 3rd peeping Tom incident was also recently reported. So 3rd peeping Tom incident, I think, of this year. So they have stepped out on the CCTVs and also security patrols. But is it enough? They are also now in talks about telling students what they should be doing, and they're talking about running trainings relating to how it's not acceptable. First of all, yes, it's criminal, but because these are governed by the schools, so it's really up to the school as well to decide what to do. So in a community center, this was also being reported, where there was somebody who did criminal trespass with the intent to commit an offense in insulting the modesty of a woman. So this person in the newspaper report actually said he felt excited when he caught glimpses of the clothes and skin of a woman, and he was fined a maximum of 1,500. So with these cases where it seems like the offender would get off pretty lightly, I think it just does not make a woman feel safe to be a woman anymore. Let's talk a little bit about why it is not right in the first place. Forget about talking about how it is criminal. Let's talk about you don't do things to people that doesn't make them feel good. That's the bottom line. We don't hurt other people. And when you peep at them, invade their privacy, and you take upskirts videos, you're obviously hiding, and you're obviously hiding because you know that this is not the right thing to do. Forget about it being criminal and you can get caught. It's just not the right thing to do to somebody. So why are people doing it? First of all, I would look at what is their opinion of women. What do they actually think of women? So of course, a lot of these offenders I'm talking about are men doing this to women. What do they actually think of women? Do they think of women as objects or to be used for sexual gratification, or they choose to compartmentalize them for that time, or do they generally just think of them that way? So one of the ways you can tell what you think of women is what comes out of your mouth, consciously or unconsciously. Especially unconsciously. Do you refer to them in very demeaning terms? And that could be a way in which you think of women. But actually, what made you think of women in that way? Is it what you're exposing yourself to, for instance, porn, for instance, the kind of messages that you had about women growing up, whether it's by your family, whether it's by your friends, by your community, by society. What do they actually say about women? Do you already, regardless of what is happening around you, just think of them negatively because you've been hurt before, you feel awkward, uncomfortable around women? So these are some things to look into. First, what do you think actually of women in general? So people who treat other people as objects, as you are to be used for sexual gratification, they're not really seeing the person as a human. The second thing is I actually really attribute um, what is happening to the lack of sex education. So you have to understand, sex education doesn't just happen in schools. Sex education and sex information knowledge is very much lacking in Singapore. So a lot of our sexuality, what happens is it's hidden. It's hidden, it's in the shadow, it's in the dark, and is repressed. And so people don't know how to express their sexuality in healthy ways. And if they don't get this information, it comes out in ways that is predatory, that is disgusting, that is sleazy. And society at large is just not safe for women anymore. Think of what is happening in India, in Pakistan. Women are just treated as commodities and objects in some cases, depending which part of the country you're at. And so when it's not safe to be women, the whole society suffers. So the third thing that I want to say is about the forbiddenness. How what is forbidden and in the shadows and in secret is exciting. And when it is not in the shadows, when sex is talked about in more healthy ways, then people are not going to act out because they are not so deprived and repressed and suppressed about it, that they actually can understand. When they understand about sex and sexuality, they are more able to manage their sexuality in terms of like understanding what is appropriate and what is not. I think when we don't even talk about it, then it is very hard for people to decide and understand. So it is very unfortunate that this is happening, and I really truly attribute this to the lack of sexuality education. So as a sexologist and sex educator in Singapore for 10 years, and being a woman, I've been the object of a lot of inappropriate sexual talk and even harassment. People who say things like, oh, you're very open, so they just want to chat with me. And people who come on to me and just say things about me that you would not say to a professional, like you're very sexy, or whoever is with you is very lucky, or are you good in bed? Like, it's not what is being said, it's also the way it's being said. And in a lot of ways, when you make someone start to feel that they hate being alive or hate being human or woman, it is not right, because you are actually robbing them of their power. You're taking it away from them without their permission. And when you really start to value women, you don't do that to them. So in a lot of way, it has become really disgusting, and it is a sign of worse things to come. So I really hope that things can start to change in Singapore. And in my own way, that's what I'm doing. I do counseling for people who have all kinds of sexual challenges and also relationship problems, like communicating and relating and understanding their partners. And so I see this. I'm at the forefront of it. I see people who are struggling because they have turned things that is so-called normal into something that they can sexualize and fetishize about. So let's say an object like a shoe or underwear. It is an object. It is something that is used, but the sexual connotation is attached to it, not just because of what it is being used for, but because of what you keep thinking and thinking and thinking about it. And the way you think about it will allow you to get turned on from it. So say for instance, you happen to get an erection when you're playing with mommy's shoe when you were a kid, and I'm not saying that don't play with mommy's shoe, but if that is the start of your awakening to sexuality and it could be by accident, then a lot of times maybe what we may do is we may keep using the same object to heighten our sexual as a stimulus for our sexual gratification. And so this is what's happening with the voyeurism, with the upskirt videos. These are being used as a medium to get turned on. So they believe that they need to have visual stimulation to be able to get horny and then to maybe masturbate too. So if there was more sex education, then they would start to understand what is appropriate and what is not. Those people whose videos were being taken off and this video now being circulated, is there consent? Maybe it's not illegal because you got it from somebody who did the act, but you are still partaking of something which didn't have permission from the original person. And so this is kind of unethical. It may not be illegal, but it's unethical. It's just not something good or nice that you do to somebody else. So I think what's happening is the shadow side of sex is coming to the forefront, and a lot of people don't know how to deal with it. I think a big part of it is we as a society don't really talk about sex. It is being ignored. And if you look at the media, every time we talk about anything related to sex, it's often very negative. And that was one of the reasons why I decided to stand up for sex, to be an advocate for positive sexuality. Because when I growing up reading anything about sex, it's always about court cases, rape, assault, and then periodically stories about unwanted pregnancy and rising sexually transmitted infection rates. It's always negative, negative, negative. And then when I read the glossies, the women's magazines, it's always about do this, do that, trick this guy, use this technique, hook him, get him interested, spice things up. And it's always like as if it's some kind of covert operation. And it's not like something that is normal. It didn't come across as normal, or it didn't come across as healthy. And so what happens when all these things are being absorbed by somebody who is just navigating or learning about the world is this starts to really form your opinion about sex. So as a society, I think we really need to start to open up. But yet when I read the online comments about what's happening with this online voyeurism, I read about some of the comments to articles, anything relating to sex. There's a lot of fear around anything relating to giving sex information and sex education. There's fear around giving sex education and information as if having more information and education will lead to promiscuity. I'd like to assure you that research has shown that it's not. People who are more educated and more aware, in fact, they can manage their sexuality better. They can live their lives the way that they would like to live because they are actually making conscious choices. Why is it that when it comes to learning about things in life, say for instance driving a car or learning how to balance our bank book or finances, or a career, a trade, like for instance a plumber or mechanic or engineer or lawyer or banker, we learn the tools of the trade, and we know that these are information that we need to learn so that we can get better at it. Why is it when it comes to anything that comes to sex, it's like, no, shouldn't learn, cannot learn, you learn and then you will go out of control? Why do we think that? Don't you think that if we knew more about sexually transmitted infections and the risks, we can actually start to also learn and understand like how to have safer sex practices, how to protect ourselves? And this is just not really happening. Unfortunately, by not getting the education for ourselves, we cannot in turn be able to communicate this well to, say, the people who need help, like our friends. And in turn, what about people who are parents, whose kids actually need some guidance and support, because that's who they look at. They look at the parents. And if you're uncomfortable with sex, then your kids will in turn pick up your discomfort and not ask you questions around sex and sexuality. So instead of being an influence on your children, you're actually becoming a negative influence by not saying anything. Actually, it's not neutrality. It's actually negativity. It's very challenging, I know, because most people don't really know how to navigate our sex and sexuality because we didn't have it growing up. But there's no excuse when it comes to not knowing something. We go and find out. We go and find out as adults. So this is the reason why I feel so strongly about doing what I do, that I cannot help everybody, but I can help those people who do come to me. And this is the commentary that I wanted to make with regards to this spat of newspaper articles. The first thing being that it's not something that you should do to people. What do they think of women in general? What are the messages they have about women? The next thing is I attribute this to the lack of sex education and sexual conversations as a society. I attribute this to the fact that things that are in the shadows are forbidden, and what is forbidden is exciting and can take on a life of its own. And so by talking more about sex and sexuality and being more open as a society about sex information and knowledge, actually people will be less repressed. And research has shown this, okay? And the fourth thing that I started to share was how objects can be fetishized and sexualized, and it doesn't necessarily feel good to people like myself, who is a professional wanting to help people and taking the brunt of a lot of it that is happening. So I do feel a sense of helplessness around what can be done. And what I do is I just focus on what I can do, which is to work with the individuals and clients who choose to come to me to seek support for their sexuality. I do believe in doing something is better than doing nothing, and it is frustrating to see these cases happening, and wishing that things can be better in Singapore, that we can talk about sex more openly. And I know some of you might be saying we are Asians and so Asians don't do that. Let me tell you, I was in Philippines twice in March. I was on their radio show, and their radio show was different. You would never get such a radio show in Singapore. So don't say this is an Asian thing. I was in Philippines and their radio show was open. You can talk about anything and laugh about anything. It was more permissive than Singapore. And Singapore is supposedly the most economically prosperous westernized country in Asia. Let me tell you, no. No. I feel sad because I'm Singaporean. I got my doctorate, came back to Singapore, want to help my own people, and it's been 10 years. And sure, there are changes that is happening. People are more open to seeking help, but still, what about the shadow side that is also happening? It's also more, isn't it? And so I continue to do what I can. So this is Martha of Eros Coaching, and leave a comment below, and you can check out my workshops and subscribe to my emailer, and I do have some educational information to share in the link below. So I look forward to supporting you in some capacity down the road. So thanks for watching this video.